Hello, and welcome to the 2023-2024 Gifted and Talented Beginning of the Year Training. I am Kathy Anderson, and I am the Gifted Education Consultant at the Kentucky Department of Education. Here is today's agenda. We'll be going over some updates, talking about screening and identification, also services, doing a review of files and records, and then also I'll be giving some updates on some resources that might be beneficial for you during this school year. Let's start out with updates. So the first updates I would like to talk about are the updates to the Gifted and Talented Data Standards. The data standards are a document that contain all the things you ever wanted to know about Infinite Campus but were afraid to ask. So here are some of the updates that you will find for the GT Data Standards. The school year was updated, search terms were added, the campus path was updated to Classic View. Section A, entering a gifted and talented GT record, has been updated. Some of the language there for special considerations was updated. Also, Section B, student transfer, records transfer, that was updated. I believe it now links to the Kentucky Information System transfer data standard. Also, information was updated in Section C on GT missing records and evidence. Section D, Gifted Student Service Plan, that information was updated to include all the new information about the new form that is auto-populated from the GT record. Section L, GT end of year data and correction reporting, that has been added as well. So if you are looking to see what may be coming forward for the end of the year, please check out that section as well. As I mentioned, there is a new Gifted Student Service Plan in Infinite Campus. This new GSSP auto-populates from the service delivery options that are marked in a student's Gifted and Talented record. Also, comments can be added to the GT record, and those will also show when you populate the GSSP. The GSSP does transfer with a student and is imported through the records transfer process. There's a new report that can be generated that shows which students will show in the GSSP portal for parents. There's also a portal update tool that will turn on and off the GSSP by school and grade level. You no longer have to just turn them on individually. And all of this training can be found on the GSSP in the GT Coordinator OneStop. Let's next talk about screening and identification. Here are some critical questions to think about as you begin the next year. So, what are the district's policies and procedures for screening? Most districts have a Kentucky um, School Board Association policies and procedures that can be found on their district website. If you're not sure where those are found, you can contact me or contact your supervisor. They should know where those are located on your website. So once you look at your screening policies and procedures, you may want to ask yourself, is there equal access for all students? Is the screening process creating any barriers for students in your district? For example, do you have any policies and procedures for your students who might be possibly identified for creativity? Um, what about for fine arts? Do you have a screening policy for those students to make sure that no one is being missed? Are there any potential barriers about how those will be addressed? For example, if you have a student with a visual impairment and say they are being referred possibly for music or maybe drama, is there a way for those students to access the materials that they will need in order to possibly audition for the Gifted and Talented program to show that they are gifted and talented perhaps in that area? Then next, which assessments does the district have for screening? Are you using, a screening assessment that addresses all 5 of the categories, or are you just using one screening assessment that possibly evaluates students with cognitive giftedness? Then also something to think about is which students may need accommodations. So as you're screening students, we want to make sure that we are ensuring that those students that have an individual education program or IEP, that we are looking those students up and looking on their IEP to see what types of accommodations they may need for a district-wide assessment. Then finally, do the staff in your district need assistance or training on how uh, to use this process? So these are awesome questions that you may want to be thinking about as you begin the new school year. You may have some other questions that you think would be important. So please note those for yourself as you begin the new school year. So after we've identified we've screened our students and the identification process begins, here are some other questions to think about. What are the district's policies and procedures for identification? Again, we've screened those students. Now we're into the process of formally identifying them. Are there any barriers for these students through your process so that it's an equal opportunity for all the students in the district? Should there be a meeting between staff and the GT Identification and Selection Committee to review identification criteria? As stated in the regulation in Section 4, this is one of the purposes of this committee is to give input on the identification policies and procedures. So please utilize those members to assist you in thinking about questions and possible barriers for students in your district. Which assessments are available? We want to make sure that we're looking at those assessments, making sure that they will identify students for the area that they are possibly being referred. For example, if you have a student that's being identified for language arts, we wouldn't necessarily use a cognitive ability assessment for that student. We would want to use an achievement test that is focused on language arts and reading. The next question is, how will the district ensure equity when assessing students? So again, we want to think about, are there any students that have an IEP, or do you have any students who maybe are just accessing language, the English language for the first time? So please be thinking about those questions as you're assessing students for formal identification. Another question to think about is, when were the assessments last normed? If you have an assessment, say for example, the Iowa test of basic skills, and that test has not been normed, say in the last 7 to 8 years, students change and responses nationally change to those types of questions. It's best practice to use an assessment that has been normed within the last 7 to 8 years. Then next, what are the procedures for gifted categories that do not have paper pencil assessments? So how are you going to assess those students? Are you just going to send out a district-wide email asking for teachers to, send you the names of students to refer, or are you going to have some other type of screening process that perhaps, uh, you know, uses questions or looks for performances of those students to help ensure that no one is missed in your district? And then finally, um, the regulation states that national or local norms can be used. So if you're interested in local norms, what do you know about local norms? I've given a link there to a brochure that was developed by the Javits Grant several years ago. The Kentucky Department of Education, in collaboration with the Western Kentucky University Center for Gifted Studies, obtained a Javits Grant, and during that Javits Grant, a local norms brochure was created. So please look at that local norms brochure. I think it will answer a lot of your questions about what are local norms, how should local norms be used, and best practices for utilizing local norms. Some other questions that you might have might deal with special considerations. A special considerations video and PowerPoint has been developed, and you can find this on the GT Coordinator OneStop. As you're looking at the special considerations PowerPoint and recording, you may be thinking to yourself, what are special considerations? How does the staff use these special considerations? And how does the GT Identification and Placement Committee apply these special considerations? Because our regulation states that this committee, they are the members who look at the criteria from the regulation to see if students meet that criteria. So it's very important that they know that there could be exceptions to using the criteria, and what are those exceptions? What does special considerations mean? Next, if you do decide to identify a student using special considerations, how do you enter that record into Infinite Campus? Um, that information would be found in the data standards for gifted and talented. So be sure and check that out if you have a student that is identified using special considerations. Let's take a look at the gifted regulation and equal access. So the regulation states that a local district must have a system for diagnostically screening and identifying strengths and gifted behaviors of talents of students, which provides an equal access for racial and ethnic minority children, disadvantaged children, and children with disabilities. So it's important that the district take on this responsibility and look at any barriers that might be uh, put up for children who may have a disability, or maybe a developing language, an English language, and you're giving an assessment that's only in English, those types of barriers that might be put up for those children. As you can see by the graphic that's on this slide, we have equality, equity, and barriers removed. So there, for equality, we've got 3 children, and they're all at a ball game, and there's a fence in front of them, and the children are of different heights. And so equal access or has been given to these students. They all have the same box that's the same height, and yet the youngest or smallest student still cannot see over the fence, even though they all have been kind of a equal opportunity to see over the fence. Then with equity, we have the same students, and this time the smallest student has several boxes in order to ensure that there is equity for him to see over the fence. And then the last graphic there is showing barriers removed. So there aren't any boxes to stand on because the boxes aren't needed. The barrier or the fence has been removed, and so all 3 of the children can now see the ball game. So it's really important for us to think of in our gifted education programs, what are the barriers so that those barriers are removed. Is it the assessment? Is the assessment the barrier? Is there a procedure that's being um, utilized that needs to be removed? These are all good questions to ask yourself here at the beginning of the year to ensure that there is equal access to the gifted education program and services for these students. Also, let's talk about assessments and accommodations. So according to 707 KAR 1:320 section 5 subsection 10, a student with an IEP must have a statement of individual accommodation uh, in order to participate in state or district-wide assessments. So when you are screening students or giving students a gifted and talented assessment that's given to all students, those accommodations must be provided to those students on the assessment. Another thing to think about as you're looking at equity in your district is to look at the data. So there is a report in Infinite Campus called the QA Gifted and Talented Report. If you can't see this report in Infinite Campus, please contact your cases person and they'll be able to help you see the QA Gifted and Talented Report. As you can see here, I've taken this report and I've broken it down into a table. This information can also be found in the school report card. The QA report just does a nice job of comparing the gifted and talented student count data in comparison to the total student count data. In column 1 there, you've got the gifted and talented student count for African American students, American Indian and Alaska Native students, Asian, Hispanic, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, 2 or more races, and white students. And in 2021-2022, the total student count for the Gifted and Talented program calculated to 84,915. And then the second column, the percent to GT total. So this is giving us a percent of how many African American students and other ethnicities that you see there were in the GT program for the 2021-2022 school year. So we had a 6%, 6.35% for African Americans, 0.12% for American Indians, and so on, were in the gifted program for that particular school year. Then the third column, we've got our total enrollment count for the year. So there were 65,997 African American students in the state, and there were 801 American Indian, Alaskan Native students for the state. There were 12,241 total Asian students in our state, and so on, which gives us in that green column or green row that you see there, in that school year of 2021-2022, we had 615,878 students across the state. And then the next column, percent to total enrollment, gives you the percent of that ethnicity to the total percent to the total number of 615,878. So for example, Hispanic students in this year, we had 8.5% overall Hispanic or Latina students in our state. So one of the leading gifted educators in our state is, or in our nation, is Dr. Donna Ford, and she is known nationally for her work in equity and cultural education. And she uses the Equal Employment Opportunity, EEO, Commission's 80% rule. Sometimes this is called the 4/5 rule. It is a technique for determining whether there is a desperate impact existing in a given scenario. And so if we were to apply this to a statewide percent for African Americans, 80% for the GT program would be 10.72. As you can see, for this particular school year, African Americans were at 6.35. And so this would be a discrepancy of around 2.23%. So this is something that you might also want to do, in your district, is look at the percent of students in a particular ethnicity or in a special population, such as free and reduced meals, to see how that compares to the total percent. And if you see a large discrepancy, you may want to have a conversation with your supervisors or people of your GT committee to talk about, are there any barriers? And if so, what might possibly be done to remove these barriers? I also like for us to just look at the gifted student trend data from 2019 to 2022. As you can see, the percentages for African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, and also our English learners has trended up over the past three years. So we're making some good progress as far as applying some equity procedures in our districts. However, we still have work to do. Our next topic is services. So the beginning of the year could be a time to review your GT Identification and Placement Committee. Do you have a committee? Who are your committee members? Do you need any new members? The definition for the GT Identification and Placement Committee is in Section 1 of the regulation. It is subsection 17. And it states that the Gifted and Talented Identification and Placement Committee is a school or district committee that's made up of the Gifted Education Coordinator or a Gifted Education teacher, uh, representatives from classroom teachers, administrators, counselors, special education teachers, and other appropriate personnel who follow district policies and procedures to formally identify and determine the level and type of service options. So not only are they helping to identify students, but they are also determining service options. So they are a very important committee. So please ensure that you have either a district or school or maybe both um, in your district to ensure uh, that students are meeting the criteria and also that they are used to provide services, to discuss services for students. They also have some other roles according to the regulation. Another role that they provide in your district is to provide feedback on the adequacy of the identification and diagnostic procedures. So again, um, your committee are a good group of people to look at that data that we just talked about and have discussions about um, are the identification and screening procedures in the district, are they equitable to all students? And to give feedback about how that might be changed if they don't feel like it's an equitable process. Also, they are a committee that ensures a variety of views are heard during the selection and placement process. So it could be very helpful to have a special education teacher, an English language teacher or coordinator, perhaps other teachers who know the students well, so that if there are questions that come up about a student, that a variety of people are talking about that student and looking at the evidence that's been gathered. Another purpose, as I said before, is to ensure which students meet the criteria and which services will be included on the student's gifted and talented student services plan. Something else that the committee does is they help to provide communication and support in the school and the community. So, perhaps they will help to have information that's provided on the district webpage, or perhaps they will get the word out that this is the time for teachers or parents to recommend students for the program. Um, that could involve a host of different things as we think about providing communication and support. Something else to note is that the regulation says that parents must give input for services and that the district has to have a procedure that they implement to obtain that information from parents about their students' interests, needs, and abilities, and that this input will be used to provide services for the Gifted and Talented Student Services Plan. Um, Something else to think about is when you gather this information, this is something that needs to be brought before the committee, since they are the, the final group of people who help to decide which services will be provided to a student. So it's important that this input from parents is brought before the committee and shared with them so that it can be discussed. Some other questions to consider about services would be, which program model is the district going to provide? Um, are they going to differentiate? Are they going to replace, supplement, modify the curriculum for gifted and talented students? What services are students receiving? For example, you may have students who have transferred from the elementary to middle school, and so the services at the middle school that are provided may be different from those that would be provided to an elementary student. The same thing could go for our high school students. What students are they receiving? Um, we wouldn't want parents or staff to think that the Gifted and Talented program uh, runs kindergarten through 8th grade, and then there are no services that are provided in high school. So what services are students receiving K through 12? Do staff know who their students are so that they may assist with differentiation or services? Are there students who may need acceleration? We know from A Nation Deceived, uh, the article that was created several years ago, that acceleration is a good way to provide services for students. Some people think there's only one type of acceleration. We know from this article that was created that there are many different types of acceleration besides just whole grade acceleration. There could be subject acceleration, there could be early entrance to kindergarten, there could be early entrance to college or high school. So there's many different types of acceleration. And so this is something that needs to be explored and shared with our GT placement committee. Then also which partners could help provide services when we're thinking about um, assistance for services. Are there people in your school building who might help you with services? Of course, we want to reach out to them. Are there other community members such as 4-H staff or other fine arts groups in your district that might be willing to assist with services or donate their time? What organizations might have grants to help provide services? So these are all really important questions to ask as we start the beginning of the year and we're thinking about services. Communication and training are key when we're thinking about the program. GT students spend much of their learning time in the regular classroom, and so it's important that we build relationships with staff to provide resources and support that they might need in order to work with GT students in the classroom. When you do your survey or program evaluation with your staff, this would be a good opportunity to reach out to them to see what types of professional development they might need in order to work with the GT students in their classroom. The program also relies on teachers and staff to assist in referring students for the gifted program. As I said before, most of the GT students spend most of their time in the regular classroom, and these are the staff who probably know these students the best. But even though they know them, they may need some training on the characteristics of gifted students and how to provide instruction for them. If possible, ask for maybe for a short time to present information about the characteristics of gifted students at either a faculty member at a faculty meeting, or perhaps you might want to also train teachers on how to use jot down forms for observation or other screening tools. Professional learning time or PLCs is also a good time to talk about teachers, about gifted students or possible gifted students, and to provide some support and resources for them. If there's not a time at a faculty meeting, you might think about creating a short video that describes the gifted categories and characteristics to look for. A recording could also be used to create some best practices for differentiating instruction for gifted students. There are many resources for services, and here are just a couple to think about. As I said, school and district staff may have some special interests that you don't know about, but perhaps through that survey, you might be able to find out more about the staff and their interests and gifts. Also, 21st Century and Gear Up programs offer opportunities for students that might be utilized with your gifted students. There may be community members or centers in your district or region that would be advantageous to helping gifted or advanced learners. There may be local businesses who might be willing to assist with students, maybe your leadership students or your other students. And then also the 4-H organization. They have many leadership opportunities for students that you could look into. Here are some statewide resources that might be helpful. The Fund for the Arts. This is a organization that provides curriculum-based arts education for students. Um, they can be reached out to and to see what all they offer. I provided the link there for you. Kentucky Arts Council. This is a statewide council, and when you go to their website, you'll see many different types of grants and arts programs. Please look at the deadlines for these, for applying for these grants. For example, there's a transportation grant that helps to find transportation to and from arts programs for students. There's also the Kentucky Odyssey of the Mind. This is a creativity um, program, and it helps develop creativity and 21st century skills. And then we have the Student Technology Leadership Program, or STLP. And many of you, I'm sure, are aware of this program in your schools. It helps to develop technical skills and leadership through competition and also recognition and certification. So check out some of these programs. Let's talk about the Gifted and Talented Services Plan. So after the district has thought about services for students, parents need to be notified annually regarding the services that will be included in their Gifted and Talented Services Plan, the GSSP. The beginning of the year is a good time to think about how you'll notify parents and what type of plan the district will use. For example, some districts like to notify their parents through email that their Gifted and Talented Student Services Plan will be available in Infinite Campus, and they give a certain date so that those parents know that it will be available for them in the portal. If you're using the GSSP and IC, you could contact the case's staff to assist you with collecting emails from parents or gifted students. You could email these parents, and make sure that they know when it's been published, not only for the GSSP, but also for the progress report that parents must be notified about each semester. The email could also include procedures to follow in requesting services, to request a change in services, or maybe even directions on how to access the portal if they're new to the GSSP and progress report being in the portal. If you're using a plan that's created by the district, you may still want to email or send a reminder using the district's communication app that the GSSP will be coming home with students, or to be looking for it in the mail. It's always good to give parents and families a heads up about when important documentation is coming home that you want them to be aware of. Um, Here are some benefits to using the GSSP and Progress Report in Infinite Campus. As I've said before, it can be seen by parents in Infinite Campus through the parent portal. It transfers with students from district to districts. It gives a chronological record of the services that children have had over the years. It can be printed individually or batch printed. Again, for directions, please see the GT data standards on how to enter records, and also look at the GSSP training that's on the GT Coordinator OneStop. All right, let's talk about files and records. So there is a retention public school district records and retention schedule that I've given a link there for, and it talks about that certain things need to be kept for students. For example, the assessment documentation that's used to identify students needs to be kept in the student's cumulative file, and also any evidence that's used to identify a student needs to be kept for 1 year after graduation, then disposed of appropriately. So this is a good time to be looking at your GT folders and deciding, which ones need to be kept and then which ones need to be disposed of appropriately. Please follow the guidance that's in that public school district records retention schedule. There's also information there in that retention schedule about GT documentation for committee meetings. Each district has a Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives regional contact who can assist you with, how your information is filed in your region or disposed of. In a GT student folder, please file your identification documentation, copies of the Gifted Student Service Plan and progress reports if you're not using the Infinite Campus forms. So each year we have new staff that join the district. If there are new enrollment staff, please ensure that they understand that GT records do not automatically transfer. Please work with your cases contact to and collaborate with them on this information so that all of our staff who work with enrolling students understand that GT records do not automatically transfer. You could schedule time to meet with staff to review this process or create a short video or PowerPoint presentation that could be emailed that reviews the transfer process. Or maybe just point them towards the cases data standards that talks about the transfer of records. I believe there's also a short video that staff could watch. Just contact your cases person and work together to create a process to ensure that staff understand about the GT record, and also that they understand that the GSSP in Infinite Campus and the progress report do transfer, but there are different processes for that. And these are covered in the GT data standards as well as in the GSSP training that I've alluded to several times during this training. Here are a few resources to assist you with ways to support yourself and staff this coming school year. So one of the things that really supports the program is funding. And just a reminder that during the 2022 legislative session, House Bill 1 increased the GT appropriation from 6.2 million to 10 million. And to provide better equity, when we received an increase in funds, the Kentucky Department of Education reviewed that funding formula, and it was decided that in order to provide better equity, that the formula would be changed. So each district receives a $20,000 base, regardless of the size of the total population of the district, and then a per student allocation based on the previous school year's enrollment is also calculated to give the total allocation that each district receives. Award letters and allocations are posted on the state grants webpage, and the new fiscal year begins July 1st of each year. So if you're unsure of how much your district has received this year, please look on that state grants webpage and you will see how much your district has been allotted. OCL has two regular communications, which are emailed to those on the listserv. There is a weekly news you can use email. The email contains announcements from all programs in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, including Gifted and Talented. Be on the lookout for the announcements about staff and student opportunities and GT program information. You'll also see at the beginning of each newsletter that there's an OCL spotlight. We are looking for best practices. So if there is something that you would like to highlight that you feel like is a best practice in your district, please look for the link that is on the GT Coordinator OneStop. There's a link there where you can enter information about the best practices that you would like to share from classrooms or district instruction and activities and from teachers. Also, I believe there's also a link in the news you can use each week. As you can see on this slide, Rowan and Carter County shared a best practice and wanted to spotlight that practice, and it was in our news you can use. The GT Coordinator OneStop is where all resources for coordinators and teachers have been moved. On this OneStop, you'll see trainings and videos such as the new Gifted and Talented Coordinators training. This training really focuses on those coordinators who have just been assigned this role. Hopefully it will help you understand more about the regulations and also about the different programmatic parts of the Gifted and Talented program. There's also the Gifted Student Services Plan training. This is a new training that was developed because of the new form that was created by Infinite Campus this past summer. There's also, as I talked about before, a special considerations training or presentation, and there's also a twice exceptional training that you might want to look at. There's also guidance documents there. Please make sure that you review the Gifted and Talented Data Standards. As I've said before, this is a document which gives directions on all things that we do in Infinite Campus. We have some frequently asked questions document and also a social emotional guidance document. Here's some other web page resources that might be helpful for you. The Kentucky Association for Gifted Education. This is the advocacy group in the state of Kentucky, and they have many resources such as opportunities for educators and parents. Also, there are presentations that you can look at if you become a member. Also, the Kentucky Department of Education Gifted Resources. There are some resources there, although most of these resources have been moved to the GT Coordinator OneStop. Another resource that could be very advantageous to you is the National Association for Gifted Children. This web page has information about gifted education across many of the states in our nation. It also has information and videos for parents, and then also the National Center for Research on Gifted Education. This is out of the University of Connecticut, and they have many videos and resources on their webpage as well. Here are some articles that you may find helpful from the National Association of Gifted Children, or NAGC. I've listed several there. I won't go through all of those, but I think that you would find these articles would be very interesting and helpful as you think about equity in your program and ideas for improving your gifted program. Here are several videos that might be helpful. None of them are very long. I think you might find them to be very helpful. Be a talent scout, not a deficit detective. There's one on differentiation. There's one about serving the whole child, and also understanding and supporting twice exceptional students. If you ever have any questions, I have consultant hours that you can book. Please use that link there to book a time with me. If you don't see it, if the time Tuesday 11 to noon or Wednesday 2:30 to 3:30 doesn't mesh with your schedule, please reach out to me and we can find a date and time where I can assist you and support you. If you'd like ELA credit for this training presentation, please click on the link there that you see or use the QR code and I'll be sent an email letting me know that you would like ELA credit for completing this training today. This is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me. I am glad to help you at any time. I hope you have a great school year.